Okay, hello, it's me, James, and I'm here with Dana, aka General Nemesis. Hello, Dana.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure, and Dana is here to talk about the team with which he won last weekend's MoDPDM at the UK Games Expo, which was a Thor team. And I've already made a couple of videos about Thor teams, my own efforts, but his was much better and sufficiently different. I thought that it was definitely deserving of one of these meta chronicle videos that I've decided to make. So, without further ado, well, we're going to go through a bit of background. Then Dana will talk about his team. Then the turn 3 theory. What would he do? Is ideal buy order. Then how he would respond to certain things in the meta or to the mirror match, and then what he would change for next time. Okay. So, without further ado, Dana, tell us about how you came to play this team and about your inspiration.
Yeah, so when I was looking at some of the big meta teams with your God Catchers and your Becky Lynches, I was definitely noticing that there was a trend towards having single big characters to try and ram down your opponent's throat. And a lot of other teams were kind of teching against that with things like Static Field. So I knew since a lot of the big teams were going big, I wanted to see if I could go wide and just do the absolute opposite. So that took me down a bit of a path where I was exploring cards like Yawning Portal, and a bunch of 2-cost utility creatures. Things like Eddie and Gazer and the rare Wong. And the goal was just to kind of get these utility creatures that are on a lot of teams already anyway, and just field as many of them as I can, get their added benefits, but then use them as kind of like a weenie rush team as well and kind of push them through for damage. It was kind of an interesting idea, but it didn't work out at all, really. It was doing absolutely horribly. It just didn't have enough gas in the tank. Turns out you can't win with all your creatures being one power or one attack.
No, I can imagine that might be a bit of a problem. So how did you come to Thor?
So I was still stuck on the idea of wanting to have field a bunch of creatures, have a wider field. As a way of kind of doing the opposite of what the meta was doing. And I thought if that was the plan, I may as well look at the super rare Thor, because I get an added benefit every time I field a creature. It does a lot of damage, and there's definitely a lot of talk around that card when it originally was spoiled. And I was kind of thinking through how the pieces would fit together, and I realized that I didn't really need all these 2-cost creatures. It was much more efficient just to field sidekicks, and I needed a lot more kind of control elements to help set up Thor so that he would be consistent. So I ditched the 2-cost creatures altogether, and I just focused on Thor and sidekicks.
Sounds good. Okay, so talk us through the team. Obviously, first of all, there's Thor. I don't know if we need to say too much about that, but if you don't know, while he's active, when you field a character die, you deal 2 damage to a target character die or player, usually player, but it can also act as control, and it's got a global which makes action dice cheaper.
So Thor was the main win con for me, obviously. And there's a number of different ways you can go about kind of getting him out into the field, and the one that I decided to land on was using the 2-cost Kree Captain, mainly for his global, which would allow me to discount my purchases by 1. And I ended up going with the 2-cost over the 3-cost, which is something you see a little bit more frequently, because I wanted to buy him early on in my buy order to use him to pay for his own global. So I needed him to be cheaper. And from there, I had a number of other kind of classic teams that are pretty strong in the meta right now. Things like Clayface really helps me make sure I'm getting the energy that I need, and making sure that I have access to a consistent flow of masks to field all of my globals. I also had Atlas just for bag management and prep. I think that's especially crucial for my team in the early turns, just to make sure that I'm setting up the consistency that I'm looking for to get Thor out as fast as possible. But it does help later on, just trying to help thin out the bag and kind of cycle through if Thor does get stuck in your bag somewhere. And then the Collector was really the main card I had on my team. I went with the Common Collector. Not that I purchased or fielded the card at all, but just because the text of this version of the Collector had the most synergy with my team, but it was really more on there for the global. It was the main way that I was planning to get sidekicks into the field to deal that damage with Thor. And the really, really great thing about this card is that not only can I do that once on my own turn, but I also can do it once in my opponent's turn as well. And anytime you can be doing damage on your opponent's turn, that is a very nice strategy to have in your back pocket. And
quite handy for a bit of control as well, because you can get rid of an Eddie. It never actually happened to me, but if they were trying to attack and nerf your static field with Eddie, you can get rid of him because he's got quite low defense. And you can...
Yeah, absolutely. I had a couple of games where that came into play for sure. Most teams that aren't running static field have an Eddie or an Istrid Horn. So anytime I saw my opponent's team and they chose Eddie over Istrid, it definitely made me happy.
Indeed. Okay. What else was on your team?
So I had Intellect Devour, but I think the main story there is that I originally had Thanathar on the team. The goal of this card was really to make sure that I had access to 5 energy on my second turn, so that I could be buying Thor on my second turn. And Thanathar is the card that I went with to help me get there. I could basically just prep a die on my opponent's turn, make sure I was setting myself up for 5. But in doing some play testing with Reg from DM North, he turned me off of that card and suggested that I go with Intellect Devour instead, which turned out to be a huge benefit. Because not only does it accomplish the same goal of making sure that I'm getting 5 energy on my second turn by allowing myself to field a sidekick on my opponent's first turn, I could spin that down with Intellect Devour and still have access to 5 energy on my own second turn. But it also helps fix my roll. So if I wasn't getting an energy that I needed, I can spin that down to a question mark, which is amazing. And it also has way more utility in the later parts of my matches, whereas Xanathar doesn't nearly do as much. With Intellect Devour, if I roll a sidekick naturally, I can field it, do 2 damage with Thor, immediately spin it down to a question mark, and then use the Collector Global to field another sidekick to deal another 2 damage. So that one sidekick nets me 4 damage, which is really quite nasty.
And it's particularly nice if your opponent brings you the Collector Global as well.
Yeah, then things really get out of control. So in terms of some of the control pieces I had on the team, I had everyone's favorite Drax. I honestly didn't use this card as effectively as it probably could have been. I was looking for more of a reactionary control piece that I could bring out in the mid to later parts of the game, just to react to what my opponent was doing if they were shutting down parts of my strategy. In reality, I used it more to prevent my opponent from doing something to me a second time. So if Becky came out and then slapped me in the face for a bunch of damage, I could then have enough time to maybe get Drax out and prevent Becky from coming a second time. So it worked out okay, but I honestly didn't buy or field it all that often during my matches.
I had him on my Thor team as well, and I wasn't that keen. It's like he's better placed on a team which is not the beatdown, and you would hope with your team, I think, to be the beatdown. He's better on a control team where you just want to start off with Drax. If you're starting off with Drax on a Thor team, something's gone badly wrong, perhaps. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. One of the more, I guess, unusual cards I had on the team was the rare Black Widow. I knew I wanted to have a cheap 2-cost mask character on my team, as a lot of my key globals and the strategy of my team revolves around having access to a lot of masks to help field, use the Collector Global, the Clayface Global, and the Static Field Global. I really wanted to have an easy way of cycle masks through my reserve pool. And Black Widow just seemed to be the best 2-cost mask that allowed me to do that. It really has no bad face for me. If I roll it on a character face, it can be doing damage with Thor. If I roll it on its energy face, it can act as pseudo removal in a pinch, and I still get access to the masks. And even on a single mask face, it's not the end of the world because I have it on there to give me masks. And it's a pretty safe reroll if I do that on my first roll anyway, because basically all the faces are positive for me. That's really good if you have a die which is just good however it comes out. That's nice to know. Yeah. Cheap masks, cheap 2-cost is also good. Right. And
from there, one of my main cards, one of my basic action cards was Static Field. A must-have if you're not running an aggro team. So it really is a lifesaver for me when I run into matches against things like Becky and Godcatcher. And last but not least, I had Confront the Mighty as a cheap, in a pinch removal source. I have hopefully anyway, a large amount of disposable sidekicks in my field that it's very easy for me to sacrifice one to kill off something much more valuable on my opponent's side of the field. And this was really the only way that I could remove God catchers from the field if I was running up against a God catcher team. And without that, it's very easy for a God catcher player to have 6, 7, 8
in fact,
God catcher tokens pushing and really straining your static field abilities. So that was definitely a lifesaver.
It was a good choice. I had Instant War in place of that, which obviously has benefits with Thor. As you said earlier, I maybe had a bit of a more explosive potential, but I think on balance, your Confront the Mighty was probably a better choice. Probably better to play it a little bit in the middle rather than balls to the wall, as I did. Go on, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say that I did definitely sacrifice a little bit of control and a little bit of speed just for consistency.
Yeah.
Especially given the format of the tournament where there's a large number of rounds and you had to play best of 3 in each individual match. I really wanted to make sure that I was setting the team up for the most consistent number of games every time. It definitely, I think, made the games a little bit closer, and I definitely didn't really blow a lot of people out of the water. But it really made sure that I always had a fighting chance in each of the games. So
a good choice, I think. Okay, so that's your team. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what your ideal buy order is, or what we would call your turn 3 theory, and also what you do if it goes a bit pear-shaped and you don't get the rolls that you want. I'm just going to get my fingers on this one. There we go. So there's your whole team. And so what ideally do your first turns look like?
So first turn, every time is buying the 2-cost Kree Captain. And more or less, especially if I'm going first, that would be it. I would just sit on 1 energy, and ideally that energy would be a mask or a question mark. And then on my opponent's first turn, when priority was passed to me, I would use the Collector Goebel to field a sidekick.
Yeah.
Going into the second turn, I would spin that sidekick down to whatever energy I ended up needing. And as long as I didn't roll any additional sidekicks that turn, and as long as I had all energy, I would be able to Clayface in the Kree Captain that I bought on the first turn, use him to trigger his own Kree Captain Global, buy myself a Thor, and then prep it with Atlas. So I would be able to have a chance at rolling Thor on the third turn. And from there...
Sorry to interrupt. In doing that, you are foregoing the ideal number of dice in your bag, if I've calculated correctly, I think.
Yes, the bag does get messed up. If I end up going second, how that kind of order would be changed a little bit. On my first turn, I would buy Kree Captain. I would then Clayface it in and buy Confront the Mighty, just as an added source of removal, which would be handy in pretty much all my matches. But then also has the added benefit of fixing my bag so that I'm not dumping a huge mass of dice into my bag after the third turn.
Yeah, for the listeners, normally you would want to pull... when you have the Atlas, you want to pull 5 dice into your bag so that you're prepping 1 and you pull the next 4 the next turn. But Dana presumably had 3 psychics and a Thor after he finished Clayfacing his Kree Captain, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And then from there, third turn is basically just hoping Thor rolls, getting him out into the field, and start trying to field as many sidekicks as you can. That's typically the point, depending on how much energy I had, I would try and pivot into some amount of control. Be it buying Black Widows and Clayfacing them in to help fuel static field, or buying some additional Confront the Mighties, or if I had the energy and really felt desperate enough, picking up a Drax.
Which probably didn't happen that often, in fact.
No. Drax really, for me, came in matches where I didn't roll the Thor on the third turn. So that's where, shifting over to Drax, depending on what globals I had access to, was something that I considered. The other strategy too was just if I'd had a lot of ways to prep dice, just trying to eat through that massive dice bag as quickly as I can, so I can get around again.
I know that feeling. Okay, and if things went a little bit, I mean, did it ever happen that you didn't get? Because that's pretty consistent to get Thor out on. We're talking turn 3, because I was doing alternative ramp with Yawning Portal and Instant War, which meant that I could almost always buy Thor on turn 3, but he wasn't. He would then go in the bag and he would come out turn 4, which is not really ideal. Yours was much better. Was it consistent? Did it always happen that he came out on turn 3?
Yeah, I was able to buy Thor on the second turn every game. And I think all but one game I had enough energy to prep him. And in that one particular game, I got really lucky and I drew him out of the bag. It was extreme, which is very unlikely, but it was very consistent for me.
Cool.
I think, and then one of the things that really helps with that, Intellect Devour is such an amazing tool in helping to kind of provide that level of consistency that I was looking for.
For sure. Was there ever a turn like where you were not able to? You didn't get a fist on your first turn?
No, got really lucky.
Okay.
I just was rolling very hot.
And if you did not get a fist, what would we be looking at? Black Widow or Confront the Mighty? Do you think?
Yeah, probably one of those two, depending on the matchup, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
If I was playing against a Godcatcher team, if I really wanted to make sure that I had access to early masks for Static Field, I would go the Black Widow route. And if that wasn't a big concern, I'd probably go Confront the Mighty.
Fair enough. Okay, so that's what you would do if your opponent is not messing with you in any way. But what if now we're going to talk a little bit? I'm going to ask you a little bit about what you would do or what you did do in the event that people feel some nasty meta pieces against you. And I'm just going to find my finger, and I think the first one we're going to talk about, if this works, is Black Widow. That's the Iceman's old nemesis, and presumably a bit of a yes. Ben played him against my Thor team, and I, of course, missed my Thor on turn 4. And yes, that was a very long, drawn-out game. So, how was it for you? Did you face many, and what did you do?
I did not face a single Black Widow.
Excellent.
So I was getting lucky in the rolls and getting lucky in the draws too. Yeah, and I think Black Widow is definitely an issue. It's not quite as bad as things like Drax because it doesn't prevent me from getting Thor out into the field. The last thing I really want is Thor having to cycle through my bag. Yeah. But it is definitely a huge problem in that it doubles the amount of characters I need to be fielding to get to lethal, which is a big difference. Yeah. I think given the setup that I have, the one thing I have to help deal with that would be Confront the Mighty. Mm-hmm. As long as I have sidekicks out in the field to sacrifice, I can still get Black Widow out of the way. Yeah. And just kind of rely on cycling through those to prevent Black Widow from coming back. But yeah, I was lucky enough not to have to face that because the other kind of control pieces I have in my team, like you mentioned with Thor, being able to deal damage to characters doesn't work in this case because Black Widow is hiding and immune to that.
Yeah, reduce damage from opposing characters' abilities by 1. Your opponent can't target Black Widow with
global ability. So you could target her with his damage, but it would only be 1.
Yeah.
And so she's going to... If she's on a low face, just 1 psychic would get rid of her, but then she's got 2 and 3 defense on the top faces, and you've then wasted between 4 and 6 damage, which is kind of annoying.
Yeah.
Yes. So okay, let's. So she's a pain. Let's talk about the next one. If I can find the right key, hang on. It's the full stop key. There we go. Okay, so Becky and Godcatcher. I think we were going to talk about next.
Yeah, and you know what? I was surprised not to see quite as much of Becky in the tournament as I expected. It seemed to be a little bit heavier on the Godcatcher side of things, presumably because a lot of the removal that Infinity Gauntlet brought involved mechanics around re-rolling and spinning things down.
Yeah.
Which Godcatcher is immune to, but Becky is scary. Actually, I'm a little bit more afraid of Becky than I am of Godcatcher with this particular team, mainly because of her built-in removal.
Yeah.
The absolute last thing, like I said before, is if someone is going to KO Thor, at least I get a chance to re-roll it next turn.
Yeah.
But if I have to cycle it through my bag, then that's pretty much the game at that point. Unless I get really lucky and I really have to rely on Static Field to keep me in the game at that point.
Yeah.
As soon as things start cycling through my bag, it just takes far too long to get set back up again. So for me, Static Field was a big help. If there was a Becky out in the field, making sure that it stayed in the field and didn't get to do that removal again.
Yeah.
And then those were the matches, the Becky Lynch matches where Drax actually came in a little bit handy. Often not always being able to Drax Becky, but Drax some of the other things that the Becky teams would have at their disposal to shut down Static Field. So things like Istrid Horn or Eddie, just making sure that I am able to sit on that mountain of masks as my defensive castle while I wait for Thor to come back around.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. So we'll go through this one. The next one was Drax himself.
Yeah, so Drax is scary for sure. I think the benefit of how quickly I was able to purchase and roll Thor meant that Drax was only a real big problem if someone was able to buy it and prep it on their first turn.
Yeah.
Then I'm in some trouble, because otherwise I'll be able to have Confront the Mighty at my disposal, and I'll at least have a chance of getting Drax out of the field, so I can get my my Thor out there without having to cycle through my bag. And I didn't end up playing an opponent that was able to buy it and prep it on the first turn, because if that did happen, that would be a big problem for me. But basically, I would treat this the same way that I would try and deal with Black Widow, and just using Confront the Mighties to get it out of the way.
I like that, Confront the Mighty. I mean, how many times did you miss your Thor on turn 3? Like, not roll it?
Definitely a couple of times. It definitely rolled more often than it didn't, for sure. I was getting really lucky in my Thor rolls, and anyone who watched the last the match could see that for sure. I think in those matches where I wasn't able to get it out early, my opponent also happened to stutter, or I was able to sit back and rely on static field to kind of keep me in long enough to get set back up again.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. I think there was one more of these. Yeah. Okay. So Typhoid Mary wasn't in the tournament because reasons, but she obviously will be in the meta, or it certainly is in the North American meta as we speak. So what about her?
Yeah, she's scary. A little bit different than Drax in that it doesn't prevent me from fielding things, but just kind of wipes them out entirely. So that is definitely something that Thor doesn't want to see. And I definitely don't want to see Drax and Typhoid Mary on the other team.
No,
that's going to be a problem.
I think the meta is going to shift a bit more once they're both available to people. We might see some more heavy control, which is not my favourite teams to play against, I have to say.
But essentially all I have at my disposal for Typhoid Mary is Confront the Mighty. I guess it has the added benefit of being an action dice, so at least Typhoid Mary can't stop me from playing that, which is nice. That's really all I have to deal with her as well.
It was a good call in this meta, both Patrick's Godcatchers and your Confront the Mighty, the fact that there is no, or little to no, I don't think there's any action hate available. That makes it a much safer strategy, both offensive as he did and defensive in your case, I think.
Yeah, I was a little bit nervous that including Confront the Mighty as a basic action would encourage my opponents to buy it and use it against me.
Yeah.
But it never came up. I think everyone kind of had their own removal and control plans. And I didn't have anyone buy any of my basic action cards at all during any of my games.
At least in that case, your Thor would just be knocked out, so you got, he's not going to be used, so that wouldn't be too bad.
Thankfully.
Okay, so just a couple more questions. There was the mirror match and what you would change for next time. So how would the mirror match go for you? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, and it's a tough matchup, I think, for me. I got lucky that there weren't a ton of Thor teams out there. I know you were running a version of Thor, and Shadow Meld had kind of like a Thor Godcatcher combo team. But there really weren't as many Thor teams as I was expecting, to some degree. I think in that match it would be a little bit tough for me because a lot of the things I have on my team that help provide that consistency and the control are in the form of globals or basic action dice that are also available to my opponent. I guess the one thing I have going for me is that it is a fairly consistent setup. So ideally, I just outrace the other Thor team, and I'm able to buy my Thor and field it faster, and then use Black Widow to make sure that I have the consistency of masks available to make sure I never miss fielding of a sidekick.
Yep.
But other than that, just hope that the rolls go my way. It's a little bit of a if I played a Thor team that had was much more heavy on the control side of things, I think I would be in a tough spot.
Yeah, because obviously they would benefit from the same globals that you bring. But the thing is that you've practiced with those globals, and I imagine that you have down to a T your sort of first 3 turns. So it can be a bit difficult if I've got a different setup, like I had the Yawning Portal and. Not that I'm recommending this, but the Instant War and Yawning Portal setup, and then on turn 3 I would hope to roll both of those and buy the Thor and put it in the bag. If I've practiced with that and not with your setup, then that's just recommends that people should do plenty of practice with lots of different globals. That's how you should prepare for a tournament. But certainly not everybody will have the time to do that, and that means that since your setup is quite efficient, you have a slight advantage there in that you've practiced with it. Yes. Okay. Mirror match is tough, I think, with Thor particularly, because they'll end up being 2 collector globals and possibly some instant wars spinning around. So.
Possibly even 2 Clayfaces as well. I had a 2 Clayface 2 collector game, and let me tell you, Thor really goes through games fast when it has access to those 4 cards.
Indeed. Okay, so is there anything that you would change about the team, either in light of what happened to you or in light of the fact that Typhoid Mary will be hitting the worldwide meta shortly?
Yeah, it's tough. There's to make sure that I have the consistency to buy and field Thor by the 3rd turn. It does require quite a few pieces for setup. So there isn't a huge amount of wiggle room in the current configuration that I have. But one of the things that I'm thinking about switching out would be Drax, which is a little bit weird because it's such a popular meta card, but I'm just really not using it effectively. It's not part of my turn 3 theory.
Yeah.
I'm not able to buy it until turn 3, or more realistically turn 4,
Yeah.
and then it's not coming out until turn 4, turn 5. So I'm not getting a ton of value out of it. So I think I would look for something that had a little bit more of a reactionary control angle to it, something like Typhoid Mary or possibly Rare Spider-Man, but in all likelihood, probably Typhoid Mary. I
think that would be a very good choice. Yes. Okay. I think that's great. Thank you very much indeed, Dana, for that talk through. I hope the listeners have enjoyed that and found it informative. I certainly did. And good luck in the future with all your games, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, sir. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. Okay, everybody. Bye-bye.